Welcome to Haunted London, a shadowy world of torment and fear, where dark shadows lurk around every corner, where lonely, dispossessed souls seek revenge for evil done to them in the past, and where evil monsters refuse to rest. A world from which no one is safe.
I've been frightened before. I'm an ex-policeman. For a while I looked after a riot squad, and that was quite scary. But this was abject, bone-shaking terror.
Be prepared to be afraid, very afraid, as we uncover the most gruesome goings-on from the ghostly world of murderers and their victims. Welcome to Haunted London. London's West End, a world-famous theater land at the very heart of the capital. A place of glitz and glamour and millions of dollars a year in takings. Visitors flock here to see the big names up in lights. But not all the dramas played out here are advertised on the billboards. London's Theatreland is also the backdrop for tales of tragedy and terror. There are malevolent shadows lurking in the wings here. Shadows which the theaters would rather you didn't know about. And nowhere is this more evident than in one of the West End's oldest and most famous playhouses, the Theatre Royal in Drury Lane. It's one of London's most popular venues, with the living and with the dead. There have been so many first-hand encounters with the theater's company of thuggish ghosts that even hardened skeptics have been forced to acknowledge their existence.
Well, I thought I was going mad. You know, I never believed in ghosts at all, and I really had to change my mind. I mean, we were definitely physically attacked, in fact. So it was really very strange indeed, and one must put it to some supernatural cause.
I frankly was very skeptical about ghosts. I'd worked in theatres, heard stories, but never seen anything or experienced anything. That wasn't till I came to Drury Lane.
Lift your gaze from the stage if you come to a performance here. You might spot one theatergoer who didn't pay for his ticket. 200 years ago, Joe Grimaldi was the talk of the town. His fame came from pantomime, for which he invented a new type of character, the innocent rogue, which has become the model for clowns ever since. To this day, clowns the world over are called Joeys in his honor. But behind the mask, Grimaldi was a sick and desperate man. Theater was his life, but it cost him his health as he grew increasingly crippled by his acrobatic exploits. William Briers is an expert on the history of the theater and its performers, particularly Joe Grimaldi.
Joey started very young. His first appearance was at 2.5. So he'd spent all his life tumbling, falling about, and I think, and all the running back and forwards between the other theatres, it all took its toll.
In 1807, Grimaldi played his farewell performance at the Theatre Royal. Unable to remain standing for long, he was helped to a chair close to the footlights, where he took his final curtain call. But the world hadn't seen the last of Joe Grimaldi. It is said he made a bizarre request that when he died, his head should be severed from his body. Since then, it has been seen floating about, and that's not all he does.
Here at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, Joey is recognised and known for giving people a kick. And it can be anybody. It can be the actors, it can be stage crew, it can be cleaners, anybody who works in the theatre.
Robert Stanton knows all too well what the ghosts of Drury Lane do for kicks. As stage manager here in the 1950s and 60s, he and his friends had the bruises to prove it.
Well, I was queuing the show one night, and suddenly the floorboards started to creak, which I thought was very strange. And then somebody thrust their hand into my trouser pocket, and I went to get hold of it, but there was nothing there at all, and I looked round, and there was no one in sight. And then my deputy came round and I told him what had happened. And he said, well, somebody's just hit me hard on the shoulder. And we really couldn't understand it at all. And then Betty Wolfe, who was playing the housekeeper, said, oh, well, thank goodness something happened to you because somebody has just pinched my behind hard.
It seems that Joe Grimaldi is not the only Theatre Royal favorite who has found it hard to give up the limelight after death. Dan Leno was a world champion clog dancer turned music hall star who first trod the boards at the age of 4. He became a household name, acclaimed as the king of pantomime dames. At the height of his fame, Dan Leno went mad. He died in 1904 at the age of 43, apparently before he was ready to take the final curtain. For nearly a century now, he has continued to return to the Theatre Royal for encores. When Nick Bromley was the company manager of the theatre's production of The Pirates of Penzance in 1981, he found himself involved in a different sort of drama in the wings.
I was standing, just watching the show, and suddenly I got this push on my shoulder, and I spun literally like that round. Well, looked around, there was nobody here. So I thought, well, that's ridiculous, it can't have happened. I told people, and they said, oh, come on, you're making it up, you're a bit, I don't know what. So I said, no, I definitely experienced this. The next night, because it was an entrance, one of the actresses was standing directly where I am standing now, and she had poo-pooed my story, as it were, but she felt a hand pulling her wig from behind. I think it happened because the company office used to be a quick change room where Dan Leno would change his frocks, and I think we were literally standing in his way. I mean, he pushed me because I was a man, but he wouldn't have pushed a lady. He was a gentleman, so he just tugged her hair.
Perhaps this same gentlemanly sensitivity explains the most famous trait of Dan Leno's ghost. Leno suffered badly from incontinence, which he disguised with perfume. As a consequence, his ghost is often detected by scent.
That's what people are most aware of with Dan in this theatre, is the smell. You suddenly get a whiff of lavender. He goes past.
Have you smelled it?
A little bit once.
The Theatre Royal isn't just one of London's most haunted theatres, it's also one of the oldest theatre sites. Actors and audiences have been coming here since 1663. The building's burned down so many times that eventually they invented the fire safety curtain here. And it's in the area behind that curtain, backstage, that a violent event led to another haunting. In 1735, two actors began a furious argument over a wig. One, Charles Maplin, lifted a stick to beat the other, Woodruff, and put his eye out, an injury which was to prove fatal.
During this tussle over the wig, Macklin stabbed Woodruff in the eye. And when Woodruff was lying on the floor there, Macklin, to try and be helpful, then proceeded to urinate in his eye. Whether that was to disinfect it or not, but he certainly thought he was being helpful.
It didn't work. Woodruff died. But it is thought the gesture did help Macklin win an acquittal at the subsequent trial. Today, though, it seems Macklin's spirit can't leave the scene of his outburst.
The ghost of Macklin is believed to be the ghost that haunts the front of the stalls here. It is a very active ghost, walks up and down, paces about. Macklin was a very physical actor. He was always on the go. He was a man with huge energy, and therefore it's generally assumed that this ghost is, because it is such a active ghost, that one is Macklin.
It was while the current theatre was being built on the ruins of the old in the 1870s that workmen opened up a void behind the wall and made a find which has since been connected to the theatre's most famous ghost. Those who work at Drury Lane have been puzzling over the facts behind the discovery ever since.
Workmen knocked through a wall and discovered in this area a skeleton with a Cromwellian dagger and, some people say, some pieces of grey fabric in the ribs. Now, interestingly enough, before that time, people had reported seeing a ghost, a man dressed in grey.
The man in grey, the theatre's most frequently seen ghost, is slim. young and dressed in a white ruffed shirt, gray riding cloak, and three-cornered hat of the 18th century. He wears riding boots and carries a sword.
Now this is the upper circle entrance that they created, which is where all of the sightings of the man in grey have been made, as he walks along the back of the auditorium towards the side wall in the direction of the skeleton void area. Now we have no idea of how the skeleton is connected to the ghost. Was the ghost the killer or the victim? There's no way of knowing. All we know is that he passes from the auditorium and disappears through the wall where the skeleton was found. Now, as well as being seen walking across the back of the auditorium, the man in grey has been sighted sitting in this very seat watching rehearsals. And there is a story of one cleaner, quite new to the building, who reported a man in the exact same clothes as everyone else describes for the man in grey, sitting in this seat.
Curiously, for a ghost with such terrible associations, the Grey Man's appearances are viewed as positive events. He appears in daylight, often during rehearsals, and only if the forthcoming run is going to be a success. And he can hardly be accused of shyness. In 1939, he appeared in front of half the cast of The Dancing Years.
The Grey Man is really the biggest mystery, because we haven't got a clue as to who he is. When he appears in a riding cloak, he's got a tricorn hat on, whether he's a member of the audience, whether he's a patron, whether he's been a follower of one of the actresses. We really do not know. He is a mystery to us as to who he is, although he's the one that's seen most regularly.
The dramas played out off-stage in London's theatreland have been as violent and mysterious as any of the nightly performances. Next time you buy a ticket, you might get more excitement than you planned. Right at the heart of Mayfair, one of London's most exclusive neighborhoods is Berkeley Square. The elegant homes have always been highly sought after by London's high society. All that is, apart from this house. For years, number 50 stood empty. It's been nearly a century now since anyone lived in the house after a catalog of suicides, bizarre deaths, and people being driven insane by apparitions. Nobody dared. To this day, people who are sensitive to psychic phenomena say that the very brickwork is charged with a strange energy. But according to Richard Jones, author of Walking Haunted London, the very horrors which gave this house its fearful reputation also made it a dangerous magnet for the curious and foolhardy.
100 or so years ago, the building had become something of a tourist attraction. In fact, Charles Harper, in 1907, writes in his book Haunted Houses that the famous haunted house in Berkeley Square was long one of those things that no country cousin come up from the province to London on sightseeing bent ever willingly missed.
Unearthly phenomena were witnessed from the street. Onlookers described seeing flashing lights. They heard screams and the sound of a heavy body being dragged down the stairs. But it's what went on inside 50 Berkeley Square which earned this house its terrible reputation and claimed lives. These days, the interior of the house belies its grisly past. It's hard to imagine a place more sedate and decorous. For the last 60 years, it's been an antiquarian bookshop. But there can be few stories on the shelves more bizarre than the tales surrounding these very rooms.
There are several ghosts here, all